I was 34 when I finally did it. I bought my own little house on Lake Tahoe. No one helped me. No handouts, no inheritance, no partner splitting the mortgage. Just a decade of saying no to vacations, packing my lunch, and working late while everyone else went home. That house was my peace: quiet beige walls, a loft where I could paint, a deck facing the water where I could finally breathe. And then, one random Tuesday morning at 8:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was my younger sister, the golden child, the one my parents always rescued. She didn't ask. She didn't negotiate. She just said, almost cheerful, "We're moving into your Lake Tahoe house tomorrow. Oh, and you owe me $4,200 for the renovations." My parents called me selfish for saying no. What they didn't know was that my security cameras had recorded everything. That's when the real story began. I was 34 the year I finally felt like my life lined up the way I'd always imagined it could: quietly, steadily, and on my own terms. I'd spent more than a decade working as a financial analyst in Nevada, poring over numbers long after everyone else went home, saying no to vacations I couldn't afford, and packing my meals to save every dollar I could. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every raise, every overtime hour, every Saturday morning I spent budgeting instead of brunching. It all added up. And it led me to the one thing I'd dreamed about since I was a kid, a place that belonged to me, and only me. Lake Tahoe had always been my escape growing up. We lived barely an hour from the shoreline, but it felt like another world. The water, the pines, the way the air smelled sharper at 6,200 feet, it was peace, real peace. So, when I finally had enough saved, when I realized the numbers in my account were no longer just theoretical goals on a spreadsheet, I drove straight to Tahoe on a cold Saturday morning and met a realtor. The house wasn't big, just under 1,500 square feet, but it was perfect, the way something becomes perfect when you've earned it inch by inch. Beige walls I could repaint whenever I wanted. A living room with enough space for the kind of sofa I'd always pause to look at in catalogs. A second-floor loft that felt like it had been built for me to set up easels, canvases, brushes. A deck facing the lake where the sunlight drifted through the trees in the late afternoon. I remember holding the keys for the first time. They were warm from the realtor's hand, but they felt heavy in mine. Solid. Real. Proof that discipline mattered. Proof that I wasn't just the responsible daughter everyone expected me to be. I was a woman who could build something for herself from scratch. I spent that first weekend cleaning, rearranging, and just sitting in the quiet, listening to nothing but wind through pine branches. I opened the windows, even though it was barely 45 degrees Fahrenheit outside, just to let the smell of Tahoe drift in. I walked from room to room, imagining what colors I'd paint the walls, what furniture I'd save up for next, how the place would look in the fall when the leaves turned. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I'd carved out a space that no one had handed to me, no one had paid for, no one had controlled. It was mine. Completely mine. But the thing about building something entirely on your own is that it makes you look back at where you came from, and for me, that always led straight to my sister, Amber. If you grew up in a family where one child could do no wrong, you'll understand exactly what I mean. Amber was 3 years younger, and from the day she was born, it felt like the sun rose and set on her schedule. She was the baby, the sensitive one, the one mom said needed extra attention. Meanwhile, I was the responsible older sister, the one expected to adjust, compromise, and quietly step aside whenever Amber wanted something. It started small. When we were kids, Amber would break my toys, and Mom would say, "She didn't mean it, Anderson. Let it go." When we were teenagers, she borrowed my favorite silver bracelet before a school dance and returned it bent in half. Dad told me, "It's just a thing, stop making drama." Even back then, I knew it wasn't about the bracelet, it was about the rules that only applied to me. As adults, nothing changed. When Amber dented the side of my car after borrowing it for the weekend and keeping it for almost 3 months, my parents acted like I was unreasonable for asking her to fix it. When she spilled red wine all over the only nice dress I owned for work events, Mom bought her a new outfit and told me the dress was outdated anyway. You'd think, after moving out and building my own life, the distance would soften things, but it didn't. If anything, success made it worse. Amber struggled financially, emotionally, in her marriage, and my parents treated her struggles like emergencies that justified anything. And they treated my stability like a resource they could redistribute whenever Amber needed help. I wasn't a daughter to them so much as a backup generator, reliable, quiet, invisible until someone needed power. Every holiday, every phone call, every guilt trip followed the same script. Amber needs you to understand. Amber is going through a lot. Be the bigger person. As if I hadn't been doing exactly that for 30+ years. I used to think that was just how families worked, that every older sibling carried a little extra weight, but standing in my Lake Tahoe house, my house, I realized the truth. I hadn't been carrying weight. I'd been carrying Amber. And she never once tried to walk on her own. And maybe that's why, on that Tuesday morning, when my phone rang and Amber's name flashed across the screen, I didn't expect anything unusual. I figured she needed a favor, money, babysitting, someone to vent to about Jason, the usual. But the second I answered, her voice had this upbeat, breathless tone I'd heard too many times, the kind she used when she'd already made a decision that would affect me and was calling merely to inform me. "Hey, Anderson," she said, using the nickname I'd told her 100 times I hated. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. We're moving into your Lake Tahoe house tomorrow." I actually thought she was joking. My brain couldn't process something that absurd at 8:30 in the morning. But she kept talking. "The rent here is just way too high, and you barely use that place anyway. It makes total sense." I felt my whole body go cold. "Amber, what are you talking about? You can't move into my house." "Oh, I already took care of everything," she said, like she was giving me an update on a home project we'd planned together. "The dining room wallpaper was super boring, so I got it replaced with this gorgeous silver metallic pattern, and I had your sofa reupholstered. It looks amazing now. I'll text you pictures later." I had to sit down. Literally. My legs just stopped cooperating. "You did what?" I whispered. "And I need you to transfer me $4,200 for the contractors," she continued, completely ignoring me. "They did such a good job." It was like being hit with every childhood memory of her taking what was mine and my parents telling me to be understanding. I could hear the same entitlement in her voice. The same assumption that my life existed as a cushion for hers. "Amber, you had no right to do any of that," I said, my voice shaking. "Who even gave you a key?" "Dad," she said cheerfully. "He thought it was a great idea. Mom agrees too. We're family, Anderson. You should want to help us." And then, she hung up. Just ended the call like the conversation was over. I stared at my phone, at my own reflection in the black screen, wondering how in the world she thought any of this was normal. I called my mother immediately. And of course, her voice had that overly sweet tone, the one she used whenever she needed me to be compliant. "Oh, yes, dear," Amber told us. "It really is the best solution. You hardly use that house." "It's my house," I said, trying not to yell. "I paid for it. I furnished it. I maintain it." "Yes, but family helps family," she replied. "And Amber's struggling with 2 children, she just needs somewhere stable." I felt something hot rising in my chest, not anger exactly, but that same old helplessness I'd felt every time my parents justified Amber's behavior. But this wasn't a bracelet or a car or a dress, this was my home. The one thing in my life that represented every sacrifice I'd made. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. I called Amber again, this time turning on my phone's recorder. A lifetime with her had taught me one thing: she only told the truth when she didn't know she was being recorded. "Yes, I talked to Mom," I said. "And the answer is no, you're not moving into my house." "Well, too late," she said. "Everything's already packed. The wallpaper is up. The sofa looks great, we're moving in tomorrow, and you owe me the $4,200. "I owe you nothing," I said. "You'll send it," she snapped. "This is happening whether you like it or not." Then she hung up again. That was the moment something in me, something quiet and polite and conditioned, finally snapped, not dramatically, not loudly. It was more like a click, a decision solidifying inside me. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove to Lake Tahoe. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew this much: whatever line Amber thought she could cross, whatever boundary she thought didn't apply to her, it ended now. By the time I made it to Lake Tahoe, the sun was already dipping behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the front yard, but even from the driveway, something felt wrong. There were new blinds in the windows, cheap ones, shiny plastic, the kind you'd find in a rental, not a home you cared about. I hadn't bought them. I didn't need to step inside to know Amber had already made herself comfortable. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first: fresh paint, glue from wallpaper, and something else I couldn't place. A stranger's scent lingering in my house. I felt this sharp, twisting pain in my chest, like I'd walked in on a burglary in progress. The dining room walls, my calm, warm beige, were gone, replaced by loud metallic silver wallpaper that looked like something from a Las Vegas nightclub. The kind of place with bad lighting and watered-down cocktails. It felt cold, ugly. Wrong. My living room wasn't any better. My sofa, the one I'd saved 3 months for, was now covered in fabric so hideous I had to blink twice. Busy patterns, loud colors, the kind of upholstery that made your eyes hurt. I stood there staring at it, feeling this mix of anger and heartbreak I didn't even know how to describe. Upstairs, in my studio, the walls were painted an aggressive shade of yellow, not soft. Not cheerful. More like the color of a road sign warning you to stop immediately. I felt sick. And in the corner of the room, poking out from under a pile of drop cloths, I saw something I'd completely forgotten about: one of the small security cameras I installed months earlier. My heart thudded once, hard. I pulled out my phone, opened the app, and scrolled back through the footage, and there it was: Amber unlocking my front door with the spare key she got from Dad. Contractors trailing behind her like soldiers in formation. Her voice loud and confident as she told them exactly what to change, exactly what to rip down, exactly what she wanted. And then the video that made my blood run cold: Amber on the phone with my father. Laughing. Actually laughing. "When we move in, the house will be ours. Anderson is going to be so shocked." I leaned over the railing, gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping me upright. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't Amber being impulsive or careless. This was intentional, planned. Encouraged by the two people who should have been protecting me. And that's the part that cut the deepest: not Amber. I knew Amber. I'd known who she was my whole life. But hearing my father's voice on that video, calm and approving, while my sister talked about taking something I'd worked for, something that had cost me years of sacrifice, it felt like a betrayal I didn't have words for. I called my mother again that night, standing in the driveway with the cold air biting my skin. "Mom," I said, "did you know Amber was planning to move into my house permanently?" She sighed the way she always did when she thought I was being difficult. "Anderson, please don't start. Amber needs this. She has 2 kids. I bought this house," I said. "It's mine. I didn't give permission." "You're being selfish," she said sharply. "You have a good salary, a good life, and that house sits empty most of the year. Why can't you help your sister?" Because it was never help. It was expectation. Obligation, a lifetime of being pushed aside so Amber could have whatever she wanted. But of course, Mom couldn't or wouldn't see that. And in that moment, standing outside my own violated home, listening to my mother defend the person who'd torn it apart, I realized something with absolute clarity. My family wasn't confused. They weren't misguided. They weren't trying to help Amber. No. They simply didn't value me enough to respect what was mine. And that was the moment every boundary I'd ever swallowed down finally rose to the surface. I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me, especially not this house. I stood there for a long time, phone in hand, the cold Tahoe air stinging my face while the weight of everything settled into my bones. It wasn't just the wallpaper or the blinds or the ruined sofa, it was the truth laid bare on that tiny screen. My sister hadn't made a mistake. She hadn't been confused or overwhelmed or desperate. She had walked into my home with full confidence, full entitlement, full expectation that she could take something from me simply because she wanted it. And my parents, my own parents, had stood behind her like cheerleaders at a pep rally. I scrolled through more footage, my thumb trembling. There was Amber directing the contractors like she was the general of some remodeling army. "No, no, make it brighter," she snapped at them. "This place needs personality." There she was bragging over FaceTime to one of her friends, panning the camera around my dining room, saying, "We're finally getting out of that rental. This place is going to be perfect for us." Perfect for us. Not for her sister, who had worked 13 years to buy it, not for the person whose name was on the deed. No. Perfect for Amber. Then came the recording that sealed everything for me, the one with Dad. He said, "Just let me know when everything's done. Your mother and I will help you move boxes this weekend." Move boxes. Into my house. I don't know how long I sat there, replaying it, watching his voice overlap with Amber's laughter. My father had never once helped me move into any apartment I'd ever lived in. He wasn't busy, he just wasn't interested. But for Amber? He was ready to roll up his sleeves and dive in. My stomach twisted so hard I had to steady myself on the kitchen counter. The next morning, back in Reno, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Not on breakfast, not on work emails, not on the half-hearted voicemail my mother left telling me to stop being dramatic. I felt something in me shifting, something old, something tired. Something that had been ignored or pushed down for decades. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that if I didn't take action now, this would never end. Amber would take and take and take until there was nothing left. That afternoon, I asked a coworker if they knew any good attorneys. She scribbled a name on a sticky note, Mr. Collins, Reno, family property and civil disputes. Tough but fair. Tough but fair was exactly what I needed. His office smelled like leather and old books, the kind of place where serious things happened. He listened carefully while I explained everything, from the first phone call to the footage I'd seen. He took notes, asked questions, didn't judge, didn't interrupt. When I showed him the videos, he leaned back slowly in his chair and said, "Miss Anderson, this isn't a misunderstanding. This is trespassing. This is property damage. And this demand for money? This borders on extortion." Hearing someone else say it, especially someone who understood the law, did something to me. For the first time since this nightmare started, I didn't feel crazy, I didn't feel dramatic. I didn't feel like the difficult daughter. I felt validated. He laid out my options. Civil suit, or civil plus criminal, he warned me Amber could end up with a record. That it would tear my family apart. That once we filed, there was no going back. But something inside me had already made the choice. My family was torn apart long before this, I said quietly. I just finally stopped taping it back together. He nodded once. Then we moved forward. And the moment I signed the retainer check, something lifted inside me, a heaviness I'd been carrying since childhood. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the sister who forgave. I wasn't the daughter who swallowed everything. I wasn't the backup generator. I was someone who was finally fighting back. 4 days passed after I met with Mr. Collins, and they were some of the quietest days of my life, not peaceful, quiet, like the stillness before a storm finally breaks. Amber called nonstop, leaving messages that swung wildly between fake sweetness and outright rage. My mother left voicemail saying I was destroying the family. My father sent a single text, "We need to talk." I ignored all of it. Then, on the 5th day, Mom called and said, "We're having a family meeting tomorrow at the Lake Tahoe house. All of us. We're going to settle this like adults." I don't know whether it was courage or exhaustion, but I agreed. "I'll be there," I said. "But tell Amber this is her last chance. If she moves out before I arrive, I'll drop the criminal charges. If she doesn't, I won't hesitate." Mom gasped like I'd threatened a stranger, not a grown woman who tried to steal my house. She hung up without another word. The next morning, I drove the hour to Tahoe in silence, gripping the steering wheel the entire way. When I pulled up, the driveway was crowded. My parents' car, Amber's SUV, and a couple of cardboard boxes stacked on the porch like they'd already decided the place belonged to them. I took a deep breath and stepped inside my own home. They were all waiting for me in the living room. Amber sat in the middle of the sofa she'd butchered with that awful upholstery, arms crossed, chin lifted in that defiant way she'd perfected since childhood. Mom looked like she'd been crying for hours. Dad stood behind them like a judge presiding over a trial. "There she is," Dad said coolly. "Sit down, we need to talk about this lawsuit nonsense." "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "Amber needs to leave." "We've already moved in," Amber snapped. "Everything is set up how we want it, we're staying." Her casual confidence, her absolute certainty made my skin crawl. It was the same tone she'd used as a teenager when she stole my clothes, the same tone she used as an adult when she kept my car for months. Except now the stakes were higher. This was my home, not a piece of jewelry or a weekend outfit. This house belongs to the whole family, Mom said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. You can't just kick your sister out. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded deed. This is the ownership document. My name. Just mine. Not yours. Not Dad's. And not Amber's. Amber laughed a sharp, ugly sound that made Dad smirk. A piece of paper doesn't change anything, we already live here. You can't make us leave. Then I pulled out the second document. The police statement. I didn't wave it around, I didn't raise my voice, I just held it up and let the silence do the work. This lists charges of trespassing, property damage, and attempted extortion, I said calmly. Your belongings in this house? Evidence. If you leave right now, I'll drop the criminal charges. If you don't, we move forward. Amber's face twisted. You wouldn't dare. I already did. And right then, like the universe was timing its cue, there was a knock at the door. 2 police officers stepped inside. Miss Anderson, Anderson? Yes. We're here regarding a criminal complaint you filed. Is Miss Amber Thompson present? Amber's bravado evaporated. Her face went white. This is insane, she stammered. She's my sister. Ma'am, the officer said firmly, you need to come with us. Mom cried. Dad yelled. Amber screamed threats at me as they escorted her out. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't shrink, I didn't apologize, I didn't fold. I just stood there, in the house I had earned, and watched the consequences finally reach the person who had spent her whole life avoiding them. The weeks leading up to the trial felt strangely quiet, almost hollow. I went to work, came home, made dinner, slept. On the outside, my life looked normal. But inside, everything felt suspended, like I was walking through air that was too thick to breathe. Amber had hired a lawyer. My parents were helping her pay for it, which didn't surprise me. They had always bankrolled her mistakes, why stop now? Meanwhile, Mr. Collins kept me updated on the process. Court dates, document filings, statements, each update made everything more real. I wasn't just threatening action anymore. I was following through. By the morning of the trial, my nerves were buzzing. I wore the most professional suit I owned and drove to the courthouse, with both hands gripping the wheel. When I walked inside, I saw my parents immediately, sitting behind Amber like loyal bodyguards. Mom wouldn't look at me. Dad stared at me like I was a disappointment he had to tolerate. Amber sat next to her lawyer, dressed in soft colors, hair neatly tied back, hands folded in her lap. She looked innocent. Vulnerable. Like she was the victim. I felt my stomach twist when I realized that was exactly the picture she wanted the jury to see. When the trial began, her lawyer put on quite a show. He talked about family misunderstandings, about Amber believing she had permission, about miscommunication fueled by financial stress. Listening to him, you'd think Amber had accidentally walked into the wrong house, not orchestrated a full-blown takeover of mine. Then Amber took the stand. She cried within 30 seconds. Real tears? Fake tears? At that point, I honestly couldn't tell. She told the jury she thought I didn't mind, that Mom and Dad had given her the key, that she was just trying to make the place nicer for the kids. She called me cold, distant, unwilling to help family. My parents nodded along with every word. Mom even dabbed her eyes again. For a moment, just one, I felt myself slipping into that old, familiar place where I questioned my own reality. Was I overreacting? Had I been too harsh? Then Mr. Collins stood. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce video evidence from the security system inside Miss Anderson's home. The shift in the room was immediate. He set up a large monitor, facing the courtroom. The first video played, Amber unlocking my front door with the spare key, waving the contractors inside like she owned the place. Then another, her pointing at my dining room walls, telling them, paint this silver, something modern. Then the big one, the one that turned the entire courtroom into stone. Amber on the phone with my father. Dad, you should see this place. When we move in, it'll be ours. Anderson is going to be so shocked. The jurors' faces changed. Mom's hands dropped from her face, Dad stopped nodding. Even Amber's lawyer looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. But Mr. Collins wasn't done. He played the audio recording of our phone call, the one where Amber demanded $4,200, dismissed my concerns, and told me this was happening, whether I liked it or not. Her courtroom performance, soft-spoken, tearful, sweet, was obliterated in seconds by her own real voice, entitled, aggressive, and absolutely certain she could bulldoze me. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the forewoman stood and said the words I'd waited my whole life to hear. "We find the defendant guilty." Amber gasped like someone had punched her. Mom burst into tears again, but this time, she wasn't crying about Amber's pain, she was crying because the truth was undeniable. The judge sentenced Amber to 2 years of probation and ordered her to pay me $83,000 for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed a deep, grounding breath I hadn't felt in years. The camera footage hadn't just exposed Amber. It had exposed the truth my family had ignored my entire life. In the weeks after the verdict, I didn't feel triumphant the way some people might imagine. I didn't wake up celebrating or replaying the moment Amber's face crumpled when the jury said, guilty. What I felt was something quieter, like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. Meanwhile, Amber's life began unraveling in ways even I hadn't expected. Jason filed for divorce within days of the trial. I heard through a cousin that he cited instability and dishonesty in the paperwork. He went after full custody of the kids, and with Amber's criminal record freshly stamped into the system, the court granted it faster than anyone anticipated. For once, the consequences didn't skip over her. They landed squarely on her shoulders. She had to sell her car first, an SUV she'd always bragged about, claiming it made her feel like a real mom. Then the jewelry went. Then the furniture. Anything that could be pawned or listed online for a few $100s disappeared piece by piece, but it still wasn't enough. Eventually, she moved back into my parents' house. They cleaned out the attic and turned it into a makeshift bedroom. My mother told everyone who would listen that Amber was recovering and that I had broken her spirit. But the truth was simpler. Amber had no money, no car, no home, and no husband willing to stand beside her. The $83,000 judgment hung over her like a storm cloud that never moved. She took on 3 jobs: overnight shelf stocking at a supermarket from midnight to 6 a.m., serving lunches at a diner, and working weekends at a dry cleaner. My cousin told me she looked exhausted all the time, like someone who'd aged 10 years in 6 months. I didn't go looking for updates. They came to me whether I wanted them or not, drifting in through relatives who still thought I cared. But the truth was, I didn't feel satisfaction or guilt or anything in between. What happened to Amber wasn't revenge, it was simply the first time in her life that the outcome matched her actions. One night, months later, I walked into that same supermarket to buy milk and saw her hunched over a pallet of cereal boxes, hair pulled back, wearing a blue employee vest. Our eyes met. For a moment, I thought she might say something, apologize, accuse me, anything. But she didn't. She looked right through me. And for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. After that night in the supermarket, something in me settled. Not in a cold or triumphant way, more like a quiet recognition that whatever thread had once tied me to Amber, to my parents, to that entire dysfunctional system, had finally snapped, cleanly. Permanently. I didn't block their numbers to make a statement, I didn't send a dramatic message or craft some final speech. I simply deleted them, all of them. Mom. Dad. Amber. Every relative who told me to be the bigger person, while never once asking what that constant role had cost me. And then I just moved forward. For the first time in my life, my days belonged entirely to me. I started focusing on my work with a level of clarity I hadn't realized I'd been missing. My boss noticed. A few months after the trial, I was promoted to senior analyst. My coworkers told me I seemed lighter, more confident, more present. I didn't tell them why. Some things don't need to be explained to people who've never lived through them. I found new friends, 2 people who knew me as Anderson, not the responsible daughter or the one who should help Amber. I joined a hiking group at the lake. And every Saturday morning I'd meet them at the trailhead, with a thermos of coffee and 0 emotional baggage. They laughed at my terrible jokes about spreadsheets. I welcomed the freedom of being known for something other than what my family expected from me. And of course, there was the house. After Mr. Collins gave me the green light, I finally hired professionals to restore everything. The metallic wallpaper came down first. Watching it peel off the wall felt symbolic, like shedding a skin I never meant to wear. The sofa was reupholstered in the original soft fabric I'd loved. The studio upstairs was repainted a calm cream color, and I added new lighting where the bright yellow once screamed at me. Even the holes in the kitchen wall were patched and smoothed until I couldn't remember exactly where they'd been. The house looked better than it ever had, still mine, but renewed, like the version of me that was beginning to emerge. On weekends, I'd sit on the deck overlooking the lake and breathe air that felt cleaner than anything I'd known in years. There were no voicemails waiting for me. No expectations pulling me in every direction but my own. No sister demanding something, no parents telling me who I should be. There was just quiet. Freedom. Space. People talk about family like it's the foundation of everything. But I learned something different. Family is only family when it respects you, not when it consumes you. And as I watched the sunlight glitter across Lake Tahoe, I realized I hadn't lost anything. I had reclaimed myself. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It wasn't some dramatic sunrise or a single moment where everything suddenly made sense. It came slowly, like the lake thawing after a long winter, quiet, steady, almost unnoticed, until one day I realized I could breathe without feeling a tightness in my chest. My life didn't feel like something I had to defend anymore, it simply felt like mine. Most weekends, I drove up to Lake Tahoe with a small overnight bag and a few groceries. I'd open the windows, even in the chilly months, just to let the crisp alpine air sweep through the rooms. The house no longer carried the bitterness of what had happened. It smelled like fresh paint, cedar, and coffee. It felt warm again. Safe. A sanctuary, the way I'd always meant it to be. Sometimes I'd sit on the deck wrapped in a blanket, watching the water shimmer under the late afternoon sun. I'd listen to the wind move through the pines, or the distant sound of a boat engine humming somewhere across the lake. There was a stillness in those moments that felt almost sacred, a kind of calm I had never known growing up in a household where every day felt like walking on shifting ground. I painted again, too. For months before the lawsuit, I couldn't even bring myself to pick up a brush. The colors felt heavy, the blank canvas felt accusing. But one Saturday, I walked up to the studio and found myself opening the drawers of my paint table without thinking. I mixed a soft blue, then a deep green, then a warm amber shade that reminded me of the sunlight hitting the shoreline. And I painted. Not perfectly. Not with any grand intention, just because I could. That was freedom. Friends from the hiking group sometimes came over after a long climb, and I'd make simple dinners, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine to share. We'd sit on the deck, laughing about things that had nothing to do with my past. They didn't know about the trial, the betrayal, the years of being overshadowed by a sister who never learned accountability. They knew me now, not the version of me shaped by obligation and exhaustion. Every now and then, someone would ask if I missed my family. I always gave the same honest answer, no. I missed the idea of family, the version I should have had, the version other people talked about. But not the reality I came from. Because the truth was simple, I didn't lose a family, I left a situation that was killing my spirit. And in its place, I found something infinitely better: quiet mornings, steady friendships, a home untouched by chaos, and a life built entirely on my own terms. For the first time, I wasn't surviving my past. I was living my future. One of the most powerful lessons in this story is that boundaries are not acts of cruelty, they are acts of self-respect. You can love your family and still refuse to let them take advantage of you. When someone repeatedly crosses your lines, ignoring your feelings and sacrifices, protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Your peace, your hard work, and your well-being matter just as much as anyone else's. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is step away from people who refuse to value you, even if they share your blood. In the end, choosing yourself is not betrayal, it's growth.